Welcome to WitchLit, a place to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. You can support WitchLit and the serious book habit it requires at ko-fi.com/WitchLitPodcast. And you can be part of the show by sending in your own death, sex, religion, politics, money questions for our guests to victoria@witchlitpod.com. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and give us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really does help other witches find the show. Here's to never getting to the bottom of our to-be-read piles. Rebecca Beyer is the woman behind the Blood and Spice Bush School of Old Craft. She lives in the mountains of Western North Carolina, where she manages a homestead and teaches traditional witchcraft, foraging, and Appalachian folk medicine. She has a BS in plant and soil science from the University of Vermont and a master's in Appalachian studies and sustainability, concentrating in Appalachian ethnobotany at the Appalachian State University. She is also a member of the Association of Foragers. She spends her days trying to learn what her ancestors did and finding ways to share traditional skills while tackling cultural appropriation and the complexities of living in the modern world. Rebecca Beyer, welcome to WitchLit.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. And listeners know I always get a little chit chat with the authors before, and we have a place in common, I guess. So that Southern Appalachian area. So it'll be nice to kind of talk through some of this.
Please, yeah.
Yeah. So our first question for everybody, I think, especially in these times of social media and YouTube and all that stuff, is why write? Why continue to write books?
That's a great question. I think probably because I am addicted to anachronism. I got into, I blame my life as a primitive skills obsessed traditional witch on living history and Renaissance fairs as a gateway to the devil's work, So I love books because they are timeless, and I love them because they are from before digital technology. And I'm not a purist, but I love the feel and physical, somatic experience of books personally. That's one thing I guess I could say about that.
Yeah. And I think one of the kind of a take on this question for you too is so much of what you're studying. I mean, you do a lot, obviously, from your books. You've done a lot of book research, but there's also a lot of oral tradition and history in that. So was there an impetus to make sure that that's saved too? Or what, was that part of deciding why to write these books?
That's a great question. This year we lost a really important person in our community. I also, my best friend is Sarah Lynch Thomason. She's a local ballad singer who's also from East Tennessee. And through her, I've met Sheila K. Adams, who's a well-known author and Smithsonian ballad performer, and Bobby McMillan, who they're both living repositories of Appalachian lore and song. And Bobby also knew a lot about plants, which unfortunately I did not get to connect with him a lot about before he passed this past year. Yeah. And thinking about that, people don't last forever. And I do hope that by writing this stuff down, I was so privileged to get to know him in real life. And he did write books of his own, which is wonderful. Now we, can hold on to that lore for all the people who can't directly learn from us and come visit our community and stuff. So I do think books are wonderful for that.
Yeah, I do love the tradition of passing things down orally in families and all of that in Appalachia, especially in other places where storytelling is so much a part of the history and culture. But yeah, you want to save it too. You want to be able to keep that past, what if that person doesn't get to tell that story kind of thing to anybody else but one person, or.
You're so right. And I think too, it's important, because I wasn't raised culturally Appalachian. I was not raised in any formal culture of any kind. I didn't get to participate in I grew up like very non-spiritual Unitarian Universalist in a like pseudo-Christian household in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and California. And while my whole family is from Appalachia, I wasn't taught any of this stuff. And by having people and books and things, I could access ancestral skills and ancestral folkways since I didn't have a living ancestor to teach me them. Mm-hmm. And I no longer have contact with my family also. So for those of us who don't have close family, I think books can be our way of sharing those things with each other in the modern world, where so many people also come from like broken families. So
mm-hmm. Yeah, or disconnect from that culture. Like you said, you can still have your family and not have the culture too, which I think is especially true if it seems like, I don't know that it's uniquely American, but I think there is a lot about being, settler people that you do lose. We move around a lot. We are disconnected from European folkways for the most part. And yeah, that cracking the books is often the only way to get that information.
You're so right.
So you have all of this knowledge to share in these books. And for folks who haven't read Wild Witchcraft or haven't yet gotten a chance to read Mountain Magic, what was the process of gathering this information and getting published and kind of just getting these books out in the world? Because unlike a lot of folks who've been on the show, you got published the first time with a big publisher. I mean, with a big, big four, big five, whatever they are now, publishing house, rather than kind of these smaller witchy presses or occult presses.
Yeah. Well, actually, technically speaking, my first book was with Three Hands Press, who is one of those smaller, beloved occult publishers that Daniel Schulke runs. I wrote a small monograph called Fever Tree, Appalachian Folk Charms Against Fever. That's part of this Contagion series that they did during the pandemic. That is my actual first published work. So I technically have 3 books. It's very small, but I'm very proud of it. And I don't think it's actually in print anymore, but I'm hoping they'll do a reprint of it. Mm-hmm. And I basically got an email one day from Simon & Schuster, and I literally, this is embarrassing, I'm going to tell you. I didn't know who they were. And because I don't know anything about publishing, I should say. And they said, hey, we found your blog and your Instagram, and we really were wondering, we read your blog, if you would write a book for us. And I was like, maybe. What does that entail? And unbeknownst to them, I had been compiling a book that I wanted to write for years. And they asked me if I would write a book on wellness in witchcraft. And I was like, no, that's not really my area of work. I teach like historical witchcraft and folk magic and gardening and things like that, and foraging. That's what I do. And so they said, well, can you write a garden witchcraft book? And I said, yes, I'll do that. And I gave them a table of contents of what I would like to speak about. And they were just like, great, here's a couple of suggestions. But my publisher was originally a wonderful woman named Natasha Iglesias, and she kind of came up with how we would do the book and held my hand through the whole thing. And I love her. We stay in touch still on Instagram, but she crafted the work, and then I wrote it to meet this idea that we kind of collaborated on. That was how we did the first book.
Awesome. And for folks who haven't seen it, hopefully people will look and see, but oftentimes I think with books on the occult and witchcraft and folk tradition, the covers don't always match. Like you don't really know what you're getting into, but the book itself is beautiful. Like it's just like a beautiful artifact as well as the content inside. So I feel like you kind of lucked out because I know authors don't get a lot of choice about that. So
no. And Louisa Judd did my artwork, and she's called Swan Bones on Instagram. And I had been following her for years. And when they told me she was my artist, I was like, are you serious? Like I know her. And they were like, wow, that's so cool. And I love connecting with her and cross posting. She actually is selling prints of the Wheel of the Year drawing that she did for the book. You can buy them.
Wonderful.
On your wall. And I think that's so beautiful. So yeah, I lucked out on design. A woman also did all my book design. Like it was pretty much an all woman team on my book, which is really
That is really cool. Yeah. It's just so well put together, and it's just a lovely book. Mine is now full of flags too, but
I'm honored you read the book. Thank you.
Yeah, I've had it. I think I got it like right when it came out, and I kind of dipped into it, and then when I knew you were going to be on the show, I went back and kind of reread, and more flags appeared. So, but yeah, it's a great. It's just to have this idea, and I think a lot of people, and I talked to other folks who practice folk magic and folk healing, and this idea that, I think a lot of people have that it is like this thing trapped in amber, and it's not. These are living traditions, and things change, and I feel like your book really addresses that. Do you want to talk about a little bit about how you did that in the book, or how you address this living tradition?
That's a great question. This is like one story I think that can encapsulate that feeling. So I love to sing, like I said, and I make up songs sometimes based off of old rhymes or things and try to make them more accessible. And in Germany and in Denmark and Sweden, there are some charms to ask the Heidelmore or the Elder Mother if you can harvest the elderberry wood or the tree. And it's basically like, Lady Elmhorn, give me some of thy wood, and I will give thee some of mine when I am a tree in the forest. I imagine it would rhyme in Danish, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So I made a chant up. It just goes, elder tree, won't you give some wood to me? And when I'm a tree too, I will give my wood to you. And I taught that to my apprentices whenever we were working with elderberry. We would sing that and chant that as we harvested it. And I taught it in a lot of my classes. And then once I was out in the national forest and I heard a group of people singing the song in the forest that I didn't know. I was like, oh, we were creating our own folk tradition. And maybe someday someone will write, like, not to like blow smoke up my own ass, but I wonder if somebody will be touched by that and record it someday, because you're so right. We look at folk tradition as static, but we were like writing it all the time. And I think for me, the biggest issue I have with modern witchcraft practice is a lack of direct experience and relationship with the green world and the green wood, and not knowing how to ID plants or not knowing who they are. I think it's difficult to like fully embody what it means to be a witch or a pagan. And that brings up, a lot of questions of access and things like that. Mm-hmm. But all that said, I think the practical ways that we directly interface through craft, song, dance, theater, word, those are the ways that we get to continue to write it, because we can share those things practically with others.
Yeah. I love that you do address that piece about access in the book, though. Like, you can plant things on your balcony if you live in an apartment up in there. Like, I went from living in East Tennessee in what my friends refer to as my witch's cottage. It was a rented house, but the woman who had lived there for years, she and her husband had built it, was a gardener. And so it was just surrounded by things she had planted. And in the time since she'd been gone, it had kind of rewilded. So there was, trees full of wisteria and holly bushes on all four corners of the house. It was just a beautiful place that, though the house itself had some issues, like the land itself was an incredible place to live, like just in this kind of suburban part of Knoxville. And then we moved to Silicon Valley in an apartment that's planted with not a single native plant that I can tell from where we are. Like, we have royal palms and olive trees outside our window. So I know what they are, but they don't, they were brought to California. These are not native plants. And, but the olive tree outside my window and I have been able to kind of have a little conversation, but it is, it's harder when you are in a very urban area or in an apartment where you don't have your own space to make those connections, but they can still be made. And I think you do a good job of bringing that out in the book.
Thank you. One of my TikTok friends, Witch of the Southern Wild, I think is her handle, which I can send you. She's like Fallon. She's so freaking delightful. Like watching her videos makes me so like just overall body happy. She teaches how to grow in pots in your house, very small, and is a witch and is also a woman of color and a gorgeous human being. And I highly recommend her too for more details on like tiny space witch herbs and plants. And she grows vegetables too, which I find really wonderful.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, we'll have to make sure we get that in the show notes. I think people will appreciate that.
I adore her.
So you just finished the second book, but I noticed at the end of the first book, you're like, I hope this is the first book of many. So what does writing, how do you weave writing into your life now? Because you're a very busy person. For someone who I think people perceive as someone who's living this very old-fashioned life, you also seem like you're very busy.
Yes, I make most of my living as a tattooer, and I work in a beautiful, like Riverside rural tattoo studio, which is an hour a day of commuting to and from. And I work 12-hour days, 3 days a week tattooing. And working on that business and managing that business with my mentor and my very good friend who is our manager. And so writing for me is like, I'm a person who, okay, I'm team werewolf for sure, but I don't sleep very much as a person. Like I don't have a big drive to sleep. And so I do a lot of like late night writing. It's kind of my way of taking the days like buzzing, like distilling it into something useful. And I personally find it, this is where the Renaissance Fair nerd comes in. I find it very soothing to like research, read books, and then distill and take notes. It's like calming for me. So I really like it as like an end of day or first thing when I get up activity. And those are the times I work on writing, right before my clients come in the morning for tattooing and after my last clients have left. The rest of my week is managing. We're building a house right now on our small community that we have. And I'm very social and I love to spend time with my friends. So that's the rest of my week. And it's difficult to fit it all in, but yeah, it's definitely part of my like self-soothing and like somatic joys of the day.
Yeah, I love that. And I appreciate fellow nerds who are note takers when they read. Like, yes. I almost can't imagine having a book without a notebook and a pen at the same time. Like they all seem to go together for me.
Oh yeah.
And I also, I've said this on the podcast and I've had people just look at me horrified that I also kind of destroy books sometimes just because I take so many notes in the book itself. And I'm like, well, it's my copy of the book. And so, I don't feel like I'm destroying an artifact. It is my copy. So.
Oh yeah. Paperback books. I'll do that too, for sure. I do collect occult books also. So I have like the nice ones and then the user manual. My copy of Witchcraft Medicine looks like it went through a war. Like it's like the plastic is peeling off of it.
Yeah, there are the special books, like you're right, that are like, I wouldn't write in these, they're valuable in a different way. I mean, the information is valuable, but the book itself is something of value. But yeah, like a paperback mass market book, it's like a cookbook. It's going to get dirty. So.
That's a good way to say it. Yes. That's so exciting. And I'm working on many more books. I'm talking to lots of other people. It's been so amazing to connect with other publishers and continue to talk with the ones I have worked with about what other projects we want to do. So I promise there'll be more.
Yeah. So I imagine there was probably a leap in how things work between working with Three Hand Press and working with Simon & Schuster. Like, yeah, just as someone who runs a tiny press, like I know that is a different experience. So what was that like? And have you found you have a preference, or is it just, that is what it is?
Well, yeah, it's funny. I've worked with like a very small, a medium, and a very big. I've gotten a good breadth. And honestly, I really liked working with the nice, like Daniel edited my book and he like basically held my hand through Three Hands Press's editing process. And I feel like he gave me really personalized feedback on how to write better. in a way that I know that like, I mean, Simon and Schuster's editors are immaculate, but the personal feedback that I got from Daniel in that more intimate relationship, I think as you would expect, and as I'm sure you know, you can do that because it's a smaller press.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whereas Simon and Schuster, they gave me personalized social media trainings. Like they did all this market research for me for free. Holy crap. Like my Instagram has grown like crazy since I published my book because of them. And now, you know, for the first time in my life, like I have hope to get out of debt and like save money there someday because of them. So it's, you know, I'll just always be grateful for that.
Yeah. And I do think it is there are benefits and pitfalls, I guess. Like a small press, it is a very personal experience, but there's not a giant advance or an advance at all most times. And
a flat fee.
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's just a different process, but I don't know. I'm always glad, you know, I think there's like in music, sometimes you see people, oh, well, they were the big publisher. It's like this weird mentality about, you know, when a band that you love makes it big, they've sold out. And I'm like, no, you should celebrate that these things that we cherish now get a wider audience that a small press can't necessarily do, I think.
Yeah, I've had a couple people react funny to it. You know, I'm part of a very small like subgroup of people, like anarcho-primitivist homesteaders who are Luddites. And I think a lot of my community are like, you must be rich now because you wrote a book. And I'm like, that's not how that works.
No, not how it works.
Like, I'm like, guys, no, it's like it's not like you don't write books to make money. That's why I tattoo. You know, it's like, and same with teaching, like it's very hard to make a living teaching witchcraft classes, but I love doing it. So I'll keep doing it.
Well, I think, you know, you're right. There is this perception that if you get published with a big publishing house, you're going to make millions or whatever. And I was like, you know, most people make $1 a book or less.
Yeah,
you know?
That's right.
I mean, it's just not a lot. And when you extrapolate that, by the time it takes to write a book, you're not even making minimum wage most of the time.
Oh, the nights I spent till 4 a.m, like trying out deadlines, you know, are hard. And like, I'm a person, I feel like I was built to write books because like I always did well in school with deadlines and pressure. But sometimes you'll look back and be like, was this my best work? And having to sit with that, you're like, maybe not. You know, I did have a deadline, and that's kind of different than a small press where you may not have those.
Yeah, I got really good advice early on in my writing that nothing is ever really done. You just have to stop.
You're so right. Yes.
And so you just have to know, like, once it's out there, yes, you would have made changes, but that's where it is now. And then you go into the next project and add all those lessons to that thing. But yeah, it's rough to let those go and not cringe sometimes when you go back and read stuff you wrote. And you're just like, yeah,
I do that all the time. Sometimes I'm like, wow, did I write that? That's cool. I rarely feel that way, but usually I'm like, oh gosh, I really should have worded that less unhinged manner.
Yeah. I do love those moments though, when you are like, wow, did I write that? those are a little joy of writing, I think, amidst all the pressure and cringing and imposter syndrome that we all live with. So,
oh my gosh. Right. Yeah. It's really having that many people look at you and at your work and be like, you know, it's really stressful.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the thing, because I write fiction, or I've published fiction. I'm currently writing a nonfiction book, but I write fiction.
Okay.
And somebody is going to take the time to write a horrible essay about how much they hated your book. Like,
oh yeah.
I have to live with that. And it's not for everybody. I'm not for everybody. So.
Luckily, my worst review is actually low key, kind of a good review at the same time.
Yeah, I do like those.
If you looked at my Amazon reviews, I have one 1-star review, and I'm surprised I have such a good Amazon situation because, you know, anybody can just goof off in there. Somebody was like, book is full of white virtue signaling and why this reads like a history book. It's not. It's so like she's full of white guilt and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, sorry, I said that people of color have contributed to herbalism. I'm so sorry that caused you to feel invalidated. was very upsetting to read her review, but so many people were like, I saw this review and I knew then that your book was for me. I was like, great job. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny to me that acknowledging where things come from in such a place that is so syncretic that, I think you point out that, yes, it is all kind of blended together, but you can still trace the trails back. I think that was the image you used of being able to do that. And to point that out is somehow white guilt and virtue signaling to me is astonishing, but unsurprising at the same time. So.
It's really flooring me. I'm trying to practice less judgment in my personal life. And I'm trying to look at that person as a person that's in a lot of pain probably. And hoping that they maybe read. I don't think they actually read my book either. They were a non-verified purchase, of course. I wish they would read it. Mm-hmm. Might help them feel invited into communion with their own ancestors and help them feel better so they can be better allies to our other community members that are people of color or queer or trans or marginalized.
Yeah. That's such a lovely way to put it. I mean, it's practicing non-judgment is the challenge, I think, especially in these currently very divided times, but it is, I don't know. I mean, it's something I strive to do. I'm not always successful.
Same.
But yeah, it is. I want them to come to some other thing. And I also kind of laugh when they are verified purchases and they're bad because you're like, well, thank you for your $1. And
that's
hopefully you got something out of it. That is sometimes the most non-judgment thing I can do is just thank them for their $1.
That's really kind. I can't imagine. I've just never taken time out of my day.
Oh no, I don't do it in person. I don't respond to reviews, even good ones. But in my brain, that's how I deal with my judgment. It's just thanks for your $1. So
in therapy, I'm very sensitive to criticism. It's hard for me to not look for validation in others. And in therapy, before my book came out, I said, I really need some tools for receiving feedback and how to tell what is real feedback versus what is projection. And it was really great to talk with my therapist about that.
Yeah, maybe I think that should be something that should be included in contracts with big publishers, maybe.
Surprisingly, even with the big audience, we've sold, I looked at my numbers the other day. I think we've sold 20,000 copies of Wild Witchcraft, which is awesome. Astounding to me that many people are witches. It's amazing that I've gotten so few negative comments and things, and mostly really good criticism that I really valued, and lots of joyful feedback, which I appreciate. But I've been surprised. I was ready for the worst.
Yeah. Well, I think there is one tiny grace in writing in the occult sphere is a lot of people who are drawn to it are going to be drawn to that book for that reason. It's actually something they're seeking more than maybe a fiction, a novel, or even a more, I don't know, even a more 101 overview of witchcraft or something. I feel like you're, there's always this complaint that there's so many 101 books. And I was like, well, there's a lot of new witches too, and everybody does it differently. So maybe that's not a bad thing in and of itself, but I don't know. It's not a book I would say that you would come to flat, with no interest. Something has had to have already sparked in you, I think, to pick up the book, maybe.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that perspective. One of the funniest reviews I did get was there's a poison plant section in the book, and it says don't put these in your mouth. Don't do it, with the warning throughout the book. And someone was like, she recommends all these things, but I just wouldn't do any of them because who knows if they work or not. And I was like, I was like, okay, as if all the herbal remedies in the book were toxic or poisonous. And I was like, oh Lord. So that kind of stuff happens too sometimes. I'm used to people as a woman and a botanist being like, are you sure? And I'm like, I, of course, am wrong sometimes, for sure, but constantly questioning my knowledge. And it's just funny to see someone write that review and be like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm like, I don't know what else I could do for you here.
Yeah. Well, and I think you do such a good job of writing that line between these are things that people have done for hundreds of years and they haven't died from it. and I've talked to real humans who've done these things, not just read it in a book. And oh, by the way, you shouldn't eat nightshades that you don't know what they are. Don't do that.
Yeah, it's very nuanced. It's difficult. It's a lot. And I think you're right. Like most people aren't going to come in unless there is that call to this type of information.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think they're, like that section on poison plants is such a small percentage of the book. I mean, I think it's important because there definitely is this poison path. It seems like zeitgeist right now for a lot of witches. Like it's cool. Like, it's such a weird word to use around it, but I think it's really that just more people are aware that these aren't just, that they can be plant allies in certain ways, but that you have to walk that line very carefully and also know them really well. It's not something you dabble in, I think, but to draw that as the most salient point of the book seems silly to me. You're talking about things like blackberries and apples, which we know aren't going to kill you. So
totally. I try to make it as simple and accessible. And we wrote Wild Witchcraft. It's not an Appalachian book. It was written for the whole United States.
Mm-hmm.
And actually we're publishing it in France and Poland right now.
Wow. That's amazing.
Really cool. I was just told that yesterday. They were like, "Do you like this as the Polish book cover?" I was like, "Oh, we're doing it in Polish. That's so cool."
That is very cool.
Yeah, but the plants, a lot of them are European transplants, mm-hmm. And so I hope the book is useful to more people, but it's definitely not meant to be just Appalachian.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that comes through because you do talk about where these plants come from too, like which ones are native to certain areas and things like that. And that's exciting though. I hope you get to hold a copy of those books in your hand as they send you a copy of the translations.
I was like, I can't read this, but I just found out I have Polish ancestry. I had no idea my whole life from a DNA test. And so I'm like extra, it's kind of silly, but I'm extra excited to get it.
Oh, I think that makes sense. I have Polish and German ancestry, like the part of Europe that my father's family is from was in Germany when they immigrated and now is in Poland. So it's like a weird,
cool.
But yeah, I think it's just interesting to put your work out into the world and see what comes back.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think the longer I'm, in the public eye, quote unquote, as a micro niche person in a very small interest group, the more I feel comfortable, mostly just really joyfully connecting with other people and encouraging our study of our small little interest and receiving, making boundaries with people when they're being inappropriate or like probably having a hard time and I'm just receiving the backlash from that.
Yeah. People are angry and sometimes they just need to be angry. And sometimes that's directed in a strange way. So.
Well said.
One of the things I love about the book, and because my family has a lot of the stories in the book were stories that were told in my family or passed along in my family, like especially like some of the remedies like showed up in like either very similar ways or like, oh yeah, it's related to this thing. But I also love that you talk about the other things you do outside of herbalism. You touch on that. And I think more even in the mountain magic section that I got to read, about the actual like crafts and like spoon carving and all of these things you do. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that, just partly because I'm fascinated and perhaps read entirely too many Foxfire books when I was a child. So
we love Foxfire in this family. We do. I've learned so much from Foxfire and the model of learning. If you're not familiar, whoever's listening, with Foxfire, was a project in the 60s out of Georgia, I believe, that a teacher had his students do. He asked them to interview elders in their community about things that they did growing up in some of the southernmost points of Appalachia. And it's a repository of plant lore, astrological lore, crafting, building. It's just wonderful. And there's a museum, which I am trying to teach at, but they don't respond to my emails. We'll keep bothering them. Because I love spoon carving, and it is one of the first crafts I learned in 2010 when I moved down to Asheville and North Carolina. and started going to the primitive skills gatherings in Georgia. And I remember the first one I showed up at, I was like, I'm going to learn how to carve a spoon. That's the one thing I want to walk away from this weekend with. So I started it as a craft, like a hobby, and then, making baskets and carving spoons and creating a handmade life, as my friend Delia from the School of the Greenwood would say. I think it became just more incorporated into daily living rather than like creating art. Like, I actually need my partner Corby is an amazing spoon carver. We actually met through spoon carving. And he slid into my DMs and asked me if I wanted to carve a spoon sometime. And we realized we were living really close to each other. And I said, of course, that'd be great. And, I need something to stir mead that's long and narrow so he can whip up a spoon that has the perfect long handle to stir in a deep container. And I think craft that is practical and beautiful and like ancestrally and historically placed in time and space, it's just a special feeling to get to do those things. And Corby teaches in my Hedgecraft program, which is the class I teach every year. That's a cyclical. It's basically teaching the stuff that I wrote about in the ritual part of the book. But he teaches the spoon carving and the basket making portions of that class. And every June, when the moon is full, the bark on the tulip poplar trees starts to slip or come off. And we make tulip poplar baskets, just like Cherokee people did in this area, and Catawba people. And it's very special to get to do this very nuanced and historically laden activity to make a useful, beautiful container in this space and time now. So sorry, that was so long-winded, but it's a lot of different aspects.
No, I think it's beautiful. And again, I think it's one of those things that people sometimes, like you said, especially in the witchcraft community as a whole, I think you're right that there is a disconnect from the green world and even this disconnect from nature that, still this Western idea that we are separate somehow and not intrinsically part of nature and a good thing, then can be a positive force in with kin, I guess, to use a more indigenous way to look at it. But yeah, I think, everyone has the ability to kind of learn about and adapt those old ways into their modern, I live in a very modern apartment in Silicon Valley, and I still do a lot of stuff that, I can and send canned goods to my husband's tech worker friends. And, they're grateful to have that because they may not have someone in their life who has done that, but they did at some point, so I think it's, there's just a lot of those things that we can incorporate. I mean, I would love to go back and live in a witch's cottage, but that's not my life right now. So I have to do it. I have to make those connections how I can. So
we totally understand. It's something Corby and I talk about a lot is we're building a house right now and we can't really live in it. And we've lived in a bus, we've lived in a shed, we've lived in a lot of different types of places. We've camped outside and in canvas tents, like throughout our lives. It's the quest to live in the way that is aligned with our values has looked a lot of different ways, and letting go of judgment for like what the right way or the most primitive or the most pure way, I think gets us into a slippery slope of moralizing that can be really shaming to ourselves and others and doesn't really yield like joy, harmony, healing. And I try to be really present with that too, as a person who lives with chronic illness, that I can't live like I used to when I was 20 before I was, sick. And I need, hot water and ways to bathe that are more specific than I did when I was younger.
Yeah.
So I've let go a lot of that. And so I really relate with what you're sharing.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I look at it, like I have an ancestral practice, and I think about like, especially my family that is from Appalachia, that, some of them lived in a sharecropper shack that you could push the wall out and see the dirt at the bottom. And the fact that I can go take a hot shower whenever I want would have been a dream to them. And like, just respect that they would be grateful to have had that experience, and they're grateful for me to get to have it. So I think that's another way to look at it that maybe helps with that. I think when you have that idea that you're not being pure about something, it's like you are also your ancestors' dream in a lot of ways.
I love that. That's so special. And yeah, it's, our house we're building is like a pretty modern stick built house. And we were blessed to get to mill some of the wood ourselves with our friend who has a sawmill, a mobile one. So it's nice to know some of the trees from the land are going to hold us. But a lot of it is stuff we bought from, the building supply place. And we're super grateful we could get that stuff, because also right now it's hard to get building supplies.
Yeah.
And it just looks different than we thought it would. But that's, we're going to be so grateful when we move in that house and have our own home for the first time in our lives. That's amazing.
I'm looking forward to that for you too. That's really beautiful. And I love that you did get to incorporate some trees from the land. I mean, that is not something that a lot of people who build a home today get to do. So that's pretty special.
Yeah, we're grateful that the way that we each experience disability in our bodies doesn't prevent us from moving wood and working on the sawmill. So I'm super grateful for our strong bodies in that way, that we got to do that together.
Have you incorporated other kind of elements of your practice and craft into the building?
Okay. Is this a PG-13 or?
It is. We have an E because I knew we were talking about witchcraft and people will get their paintings in a wad. So we have an E.
Okay, great. We love it. So as I'm sure you're familiar, in ancient Rome, there's a symbol that's a protective symbol that is a flying penis, right?
Yes. It's like the word is the same root for fascination, right? I can't remember what they're called in Latin, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
You're exactly right. It's like a penis with little wings, and they had, amulets and little things. So I walked up to our house one time with a group of students to show, because they were like, can we see your house? And I was like, yeah, they wanted to see it. And my partner had drawn a gigantic penis with wings on the side of the paper on the building. Because he knew it would be blocked in with the wood. And so it's like a protected, which I love that he did that. He has his own animistic practice that's very different than mine. And I love that he, as a joke and with some seriousness, drew that on there. And so there's a lot of things written on the paper and stuff between the walls as like apotropaic charms, which, are hidden things. And I'm sure we're going to stuff more things in the walls. We just put the insulation in before we wall it in with the drywall.
Yeah.
But I know there's like 20 dicks drawn on that house. And if somebody ever takes our house apart, they're going to be like, this was a cult, the sex cult. We know it.
Yeah. I do love that, even thinking about that, like sometime in the future, someone may come across like their winged penis drawings or a bottle in the wall. And they're like, what is this? So.
Oh yeah. Witch bottles are really important to me personally. I've just been so attracted to that as a practice. And I've read a lot about that, especially with English. I have a lot of English ancestry. Cornish and English witchcraft is super fascinating to me and is a huge part of my personal practice. And so doing that, burying a glass bottle with pins and, some of your own hair to create, a place for evil entities or spirits to attack outside your home, because it seems like it has a little bit of your imprint. I love that magic. For me, it works really well and I really enjoy doing it. So we'll definitely do that as well.
Yeah. I guess because we touched on the kind of this English and Roman piece, I love the references in the book to obviously this kind of deep research you've done in, older collections of folklore and grimoires and things like that. And I just kind of wanted to talk about like how you approached that research, because I know it is dense. Like some of that reading is not something you just breezily go through. So how do you approach like with those older texts and things like that? Like how do you pick out? Because there's also some stuff in there that we would not want to bring forward. So how do you pick out what to use and how do you just approach them? Because that can be a little impenetrable.
That's a really good question. For Appalachian stuff, I'll say first, and then for broader European, I'll say second. For Appalachian stuff, my best friend Sarah has all of the Frank C. Brown North Carolina folklore books. It's a collection of gathered lore, and it's all numbered. And it is an amazing repository of Appalachian lore, and sometimes says who they got it from and sometimes does not. So it's really important to note that, because sometimes they mark when a person is Black that they gathered information from, and sometimes they do not. So as we navigate being responsible teachers in Appalachian folklore, to me, it's important to say this was gathered from an African source, or this was gathered from a Black source versus a European source, to help combat the commonly misheld belief that Black folks did not broadly influence Appalachian culture's development, which is insane to me that someone would double down on that. But it is the number one internet argument I do engage with sources. Thank you. Right. And so that's important for that. And there's digitized versions that you can search through in an instant that make research really easy, which I love. You can just use keywords and it's free if you look up the digitized versions. And then I use the book, the Lacunga, which is a Anglo-Saxon herbal repository. It's a leech book, a lot for the early English Germanic lore, from 9th century earlier. And that is a tougher one. And sometimes I'll just read little sections of it and then take a couple of notes from it. And I use Google Drive to organize all my notes, and they're all labeled by topic. And that is the only way I can keep track of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I think having some kind of organization about it is a have to when you're compiling that level of information.
And when I make bibliographies, which I love a good bib, let's be real, it's an attractive thing in a book to me. I love looking at other people's bibliographies. What I'll do is I'll make a Google document for each source and have the citation at the top. So all I need to do when I'm writing later, copy, paste that footnote right in. And it helps me, I feel stay more accountable to where I'm getting stuff from.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm kind of building, as I'm writing the book I'm on now, I'm building this. So partly out of my own interest, I was curious how you approach it. And partly because I think it's a good thing for other writers to hear how other people do it. But yeah, it's a lot of work. And I think to me, the important part is to obviously translate that material as truthfully as you can, but also where you got it. I mean, you're right. Accountability is huge in that.
I struggle so much because I'm so hungry for plant lore. It is so infrequently not cited. And people were like, basil's good for protection. I'm like, from what culture does that come from? Is that Italian? Is it West African, which many basil species grow there? Which species of basil are you talking about? And I feel like there's so many questions that come up for me. And sometimes, bad lore is spread that is gotten from somebody's imagination, which is fine, but I would like to know that if that's where it's coming from.
Or if someone has had this personal relationship with this plant and this is what they got from it. I'd also like to know that too, that it's their experience with that plant, because it could be very different than the accepted or cited or uncited lore about it.
Yeah. And that's, one of my growth edges is I can be a little bit of a stickler for history, and I'm not super interested in making up my own rituals or intuiting things. That's not how I personally work joyfully. I get a lot of joy out of, I would say, reconstruction and imagination of the past, And so there's an edge for me there where I need to be a little more flexible and accepting sometimes of personal gnosis is a part of folk tradition. And we do have to be careful not to be too learn from me and my mistakes, too much of a stickler for history when we are making history right now.
Yeah. But I do think it's important to let people know that.
Me too.
Because sometimes your personal gnosis may only work for you. Let me put it that way. Sometimes your personal gnosis may only work for you. And that's important to share that. So, but yeah, I do think, I don't know. I mean, I kind of have your experience too, that I really want to know, where did this come from? Why do we do this?
Yeah.
And then I also am I don't want to not leave room for what can happen if you just open yourself up to things. And it is a weird dance to walk. It's I guess a growth edge. I like how you put that. It's a growth edge for me too. I want to be open to the new as well.
Totally. And I think, I made a post the other day about tools. Like I used to be very much like, don't control me. I don't want to follow anyone else's ritual. I only want to make up my own. And then I was participating in Gardnerian Wiccan rituals in a group that I was in college. And I was like, you know what? I do love this structure. I love being held by this and knowing Wicca is a new religion, but that people have been doing this since the 30s is really comforting in a way.
Yeah. And I mean,
nice too.
Sorry. Yeah. And I think we do build the way I like to think about it and the way I've heard other people talk about it that I've incorporated into my thinking is that there is an egregore that you build when you do those things. And I mean, Definitely. Coming out of, the Lutheran church, which is very, I always joke it's Catholic light because you get a lot of the smells and bells, but you don't do confession kind of thing.
Smells and bells. I love that.
So I love that. I love ritual and I love tradition in that way. I mean, that particular one didn't work for me, but I still love German hymns. I can't get past that.
These two. We love Appalachian folk music for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. So, but so I do want some structure as well, just because I think there is something very beautiful about thinking of, even if it's 100 years ago or 500 years ago, of all the people who did this thing, that when I have this experience, I am experiencing something that hundreds, if not thousands of people did before me. So
I love that. I think of the plant plantain, Plantago major and Plantago lanceolata, if you're familiar, as an ancestral plant. It's mentioned in the 9 Herbs Charm, which is like a 9th century or 10th century herbal charm from Anglo-Saxon, what is now called England. And I just think about that. I'm like, wow, I've had thousands of years of this plant in the cells that made up my body. And that's incredible. Mm-hmm. It's kind of mind blowing to really sit with it and be like, what does plantain have to tell me now? Mm-hmm. And that's where I feel like that gathering new information comes in.
Yeah, I like that. Mm-hmm. I feel like you and I could probably talk about plants in Appalachia in old ways for a whole new podcast. But I do want to be mindful of your time and listeners' time. So before we get to our little game of chance question at the end, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can get in touch with you, find out about your classes, all that good stuff. And if you want to talk about anything upcoming, this will probably air in March. So
excellent. Thank you. Yeah, my website is bloodandspicebush.com, an homage to my love of Appalachian spring tonics like the plant spicebush. And my Instagram is @bloodandspicebush with no punctuation. I have a lot of imposters, no punctuation at all is me. My tattoo work is The Blood Witch. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. And my classes for the 2023 year are sold out as of 2 days ago, but I do have an online class available on Hildegard von Bingen's folk magic, and that is ongoing. And I will be at many conferences this year, which are all listed on my website.
Awesome. Yeah, I have been eyeing the Hildegard von Bingen class.
I would be happy to gift it to you if you'd like to take it.
Oh, awesome. Christian mysticism is one of those deep wells for me. And I just connected when I first learned about her in college, like her artwork just was like, yes, I need to know who this person is.
I feel the same way. I painted an icon of her myself as a way to connect with her. And it was really wonderful. And I've tattooed her a few times too.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So for our last question, I always joke this is partly why I wanted to start a podcast, was to talk about things we're not supposed to talk about in polite company. And now that you live in the South, you've probably heard these conversations, like don't talk about, death, sex, politics, money, religion, and company, whatever that means.
I get you.
Tender ears, or all the things people would say. So I'm going to roll a die, and depending on what number you'll get one of those questions, or if I roll a 6, you get to pick which one you want.
Nice.
2, sex.
Oh,
awesome. This is a funny thing I noticed in the book, and I don't know if this was a Simon Schuster thing or a Rebecca thing, that a lot of times when you're talking about the charms, there's kind of this coyness about the language when sex is involved. And I wondered if that was their choice or your choice to do that.
It was my choice because I just wanted to consider the breadth of audience and how people have such different relationships. I'm a highly open and comfortable sexual being, but I recognize that that's almost not the case for most people that I know, even in my like very woke leftist circles. A lot of shame and fear and pain in that world. And so I think I wanted to kind of make it feel like comfortable in a way for as many people as possible.
Yeah. It was interesting because I was like, I do feel like I'm pretty open about things like that. And I mean, people have listened to the podcast, obviously I would have figured that out, but it is this, I like that there was a thoughtfulness about the audience because people do get squidged out about sex.
Yeah.
Or they just, I think even if they're not like personally squidged out about it, sometimes they feel like they're supposed to be squidged out about it. And that's how they present.
Definitely. I've been told so many times in my life, like, you're so forward, because I'll be like, hey, do you want to do this? Or like, do you want to kiss? Like, what are you doing? Like, because I'm trying to get clear and I'm pretty unfazed. And I love that for many people, that's me being very forward because they're like, oh, you're just asking for what you want as a woman. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of startling. I know.
Yeah. Well, and yeah. I mean, coming at it from that point of view, like I do think women are acculturated to not ask for those things or not be forward and unfortunately, I think it, not only does them a disservice, it does a disservice to the people we partner with because they're not mind readers.
I definitely am not. I really need stuff to be laid out for me as a probably neurodivergent person. I've never been diagnosed with anything, but I'm a weirdo. And I assume operating on a different set of gears than maybe would be optimal. So I always appreciate that. But I wanted the book too. Yeah. Just to feel safe too. Like I can't ask everybody for consent about how they like to talk about that stuff. So it felt like the safe way to go forward. But I love that you noticed that. That really is telling of your personal sensitivity and good readership.
Oh, well, thank you. I'll hold that too. Well, thank you again for being on the show. And it's just so lovely to meet you. I've been to a couple virtual conferences where you've spoken. So I feel like I kind of had that parasocial relationship with your work. So it's nice to actually get to talk to you.
So glad. It was wonderful to talk to you, and I'd be happy to talk to you again. And I hope you have a gorgeous rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks. You too. WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press. Our intro music is Cosmic Glow by Andrew Kay, and our outro music is Voices by Alexander Shanekar. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com, and you can follow us on Instagram at witchlitpod. Thanks for listening and for reading witchy.